part of the security lesson, you're going to understand other risks that exist, such as word driving and spyware. And you're also going to describe how we firewall and proxy server function. Then we're going to look at encryption algorithm. So let's come to the concept of spyware now. Spyware is normally a type of malware. And obviously, when we say malware, it's a malicious software. So the word malicious, M-A-L, and then ware forms the word malware. Yesterday, we have looked at a virus, which is a program or code that replicates itself. But now we are looking at spyware. A spyware is a small program that gathers information by monitoring key presses on a user's keyboard, and the data is sent back to the originator of the software. So someone who creates a spyware, okay, what he will do, he will gather information. Whatever key presses you're pushing on your keyboard or via your keypad is going to capture those information and then send it back to the hacker. Now, again, we look at the description of any spyware or a key logging software. It's a software that gathers information by monitoring key presses on the user's keyboard. The information is then sent back to the person who sent the software. Now, how can you protect yourself against a spyware? You can use an anti-spyware software. So most of the time when you have to describe a precaution for a virus, antivirus. For a malware, anti-malware. For spyware, anti-spyware. Hacking, anti-hacking. You just have to use those software names to illustrate how you're going to prevent those security risks. Okay? Now, how can you prevent spyware normally when key presses are being monitored? Maybe you have heard about Quintana or Google Speech. Okay, what they do is they capture sound normally. Okay, so instead of inputting your password on a given website and so on, what you can do is you can just use voice recognition software that can recognize you and then you input it. In the same way, it gives the originator access to all data entered using a keyboard on the user's computer. If you're on a login page, the spyware is going to capture your username and password. The other software is able to install other spyware and read cookie data. Okay, we have seen cookie, it stores user preferences and so on. In the same way, it can use those preferences to spy over you to gather information. So a spyware is a program that is going to monitor your key presses, imported information are gathered, and then sent back to the software. Okay, the next risk is word driving. Here, as you can see from the diagram, there is a guy who's using his laptop and then trying to connect to a wireless connection in the building next. Word driving is the act of searching for Wi-Fi wireless networks by an attacker, usually in a moving vehicle, using a laptop or a smartphone. The way is you just drive around the country and let your mobile phone or your laptop detect where there is wireless connection. Software for word driving is freely available on the internet. War biking, war cycling, war working and similar use the same approach, but with other modes of transportation. Here what's important is you move around and you try to search for wireless network, Wi-Fi. Okay? Maybe next to your friend, you say that, okay, you have Wi-Fi access here. Now, you can have Wi-Fi access, yes, but when you will ask for connection, it will ask you for a security code. Now, there are software that can try different, can break through wireless systems so that you get connection. Okay, but sometimes programmers design their own word driving software to have access to. So first, the description of word driving, it's an action of locating and using wireless internet connection illegally. It only requires a laptop, a wireless network card, and an antenna to pick up wireless signals. Now, how do you protect yourself from word driving? Use of wired equivalent privacy, a web encryption code. If you look at your lightbox from IT, there is also a web code that is accessible behind. So you had to keep this web code quite private. Now you can set up complex password of your internet, and also you have to use a firewall to prevent outside users from gaining access. We'll look at firewall in a few minutes. Now, word driving, obviously, someone using your internet will steal your possibility of downloading large file because you have a storage limit. Okay, and it is possible to hack into wireless network and steal a user's password and also personal details. So one attack may lead to other possible security risks. For example, when I'm doing word driving, I can obviously do hacking. I can obviously do spyware. Okay, I can just log in through your wireless network and then install a spyware that gathers information. Okay, and all of this information, they are reverted back to me. Now let's come to firewalls. Firewall are security system designed to prevent unauthorized access to or from your computer or a private network. Now, you can't allow someone to have access to your computer. It will lead to privacy issues. Okay? Someone will be stealing your private information. But most importantly, sometimes you ask in the exam, what is a firewall? If you just put hardware or software, or a combination of both, you get one mark. Now you'll have to say what it does. It prevents Okay, let me come to the concept of firewall. Okay, again, any client who is trying to communicate to the internet will have a certain connection bypass. Any person communicating from the internet through the firewall to you will be bypassed. Let's see this two-way communication, how it is happening. First, from the firewall to the internet. What is really happening here? Your client may have a certain software installed here, a spyware maybe, or any type of hacking software that has been installed on your client computer, who is trying to communicate to the internet or to send information to an hacker. There is a firewall here. It will bypass it. Now, there is another way. From the internet, someone is trying to communicate with you. There is again the firewall who get bypassed. Okay? How does a firewall works? A firewall sits between the user's computer and the external network and examine the traffic and filtering out any data that doesn't meet a given set of criteria. How are those criteria set? Maybe in terms of IP address, maybe in terms of URL. You don't know an IP address, where it comes from, who is trying to communicate with you. An IP address that belongs to a machine. So I set a criteria. I don't want Ridari's computer to communicate with me. So I set him on a firewall restriction. Okay. Firewall software will warn and ask the user when a known or new software tries to access external data software sources. Here you see that any software that you maybe have installed accidentally is trying to communicate external data to someone found on the internet. So the firewall will will bypass it. There are certain tasks that the firewall do, and most of the time you need to remember those tasks. For example, first, it examines the traffic between the user's computer and a public network. Traffic, here it means that information going in and out. He just examines. Next, checking whether incoming or outgoing data meets a given set of criteria. I've already explained what is a criteria. And information that is incoming, but I have blocked that information based on an IP address. So for firewall, we check that, okay, I have an IP address that is trying to communicate with me. I'm supposed to stop it. If the data fails the criteria, the firewall will block the traffic and give the user a warning that there may be a security issue. Just a warning. Logging all incoming and outgoing traffic to allow later interrogation by the user. Okay? We log all of those that are trying to communicate with us, and then later on we try to analyze. Maybe a hacker is trying to communicate with me. I need to find that hacker now. Now, what are those criteria you can set? Criteria can be set to prevent access to certain undesirable sites. The firewall can keep a list of all undesirable IP addresses. I give you a very easy example to understand what are those criteria. For example, at school, you can't connect to Facebook if you're using internet connection for school. Why? Because there is an administrator that has set on the firewall that you can't communicate with Facebook IP address, Facebook server of IP address. Last week we have studied IP address. A server can have an IP address. So I just set the IP address of Facebook. No one across Mauritius, across the school, will be able to communicate with Facebook. Unless you want to do war driving, people leaving behind, you try to steal the internet connection. And at the same time, it prevents viruses or hackers entering the user's computer or internet network. Warning the user if some software is trying to access an external data source. Maybe you don't know, you have installed one software, but in the background, 3 other softwares that are harmful have been installed, and they are trying to communicate with the hacker. Therefore, a firewall can prevent that. Now, you can have a software that is downloading large amount of information, one after another. You see your internet connection is dropping. So then the firewall will give you a warning, but what is really happening as such? Proxy servers act as an intermediary between a user and a web server. So these are your client. Okay, you're using your web browser as a client. You're trying to communicate to an internet web server. But before any communication happens, it will have to go through a proxy server. In the same way, if someone from the internet attacks your computer directly, it won't be possible because he has to pass through the intermediate server known as a proxy server. So any attack will go through that proxy server, and you can remain safe. Proxy servers have the following main function. Using cache, they can speed up access to a website by storing the web pages after the first visit. On later visits, the cache versions are used instead of the web server. Let's see what happened. Instead of each time communicating to the web server to request a web page, what you can do, you can store certain information on a proxy server. Okay, proxy server. From the proxy server, you can retrieve it instead of normally communicating to the internet. It keeps your identity, your IP address secret, accessing the internet via the proxy identity. As you can see, it can serve as an additional firewall, providing greater protection from online threats. It also allows internet traffic to be filtered, enabling the blocking of individual websites. So, like I said, it's like an additional firewall, which will help you in monitoring some kind of information coming in and out. Until now, we have gone through Firewall. We have studied the concept of proxy server, how it can be used to protect us against risks like war driving, hacking, spyware, and viruses. But information which is shared between two persons, they can be linked by a third person. Let's say I have a